The manuscript reached the researcher via an anonymous letter, postmarked Rome 3 days after the funeral of Father Gabriele Morti in September 2016. Inside the envelope, sealed with red wax, were a few yellowed pages and a small digital recording. The shaky handwriting on the cover read, "For those who dare to know the truth." For decades, this document remained hidden in the Vatican's most secure archives, suppressed by ecclesiastical authorities who feared the implications of its content. Today, finally, these words can be revealed to the world. Father Gabriele Morti was no ordinary man. For over 30 years, he served as chief exorcist of the Diocese of Rome, performing over 60,000 exorcisms in his lifetime. His experiences transcended the boundaries of human comprehension, and in his final years, with death approaching, he decided to break his silence about what he had witnessed in the darkest depths of human existence. The secret interview was conducted in his modest Vatican City residence during the winter of 2015, a few months before his death. The walls of that small room, adorned with antique crosses and sacred images, seemed to hold millennial secrets, echoes of spiritual battles that few mortals would dare to face. The elderly priest's voice, recorded on that gray December afternoon, carried the weight of decades of direct confrontation with forces most people prefer to believe don't exist. His eyes, already weary with age, shone with a supernatural intensity as he began to speak about what he had seen beyond the veil of physical reality. "There is a world parallel to ours," he whispered, his clasped hands trembling slightly, "a realm where the laws we know simply don't apply. Throughout all these years performing exorcisms, I didn't just expel demons, I saw hell with my own eyes." Father Morti's confession wasn't driven by sensationalism or a desire to shock. It was, above all, the testimony of a man who had dedicated his entire life to the service of God and who, in the final moments of his earthly journey, felt an urgent need to share truths that could forever alter humanity's understanding of the nature of existence. He spoke of mystical experiences that defied conventional description, moments when his consciousness had been transported to dimensions where eternal suffering and divine separation manifested in unimaginable ways. During his most intense exorcisms, Father Morti reported experiencing visions that took him far beyond the room where the ceremony was taking place. He described how his soul seemed to detach from his physical body, being dragged through a tunnel of absolute darkness, where screams echoed like a macabre chorus of infinite despair. It wasn't just a psychological experience, he emphasized with unwavering conviction. It was real, more real than anything I had ever experienced on earth. I could feel the suffocating heat, the palpable hopelessness, the complete absence of love or hope. These involuntary journeys to what he believed to be hell didn't occur during every exorcism, but only in the most extreme cases, when the demonic forces present were particularly powerful. Father Morti described these entities not as mythological creatures or symbolic figures, but as real consciousnesses that had chosen rebellion against divine order. "They aren't just evil spirits," he explained, his voice growing graver and more solemn. "They are souls that at some point in eternity made a definitive choice against love, against light, against God, and that choice condemned them to an existence of eternal torment." What was most striking about Father Morti's testimony was his detailed description of the different layers or levels of hell he claimed to have witnessed. It wasn't a single uniform place, but a complex hierarchy of suffering, where each soul was punished according to the nature and gravity of its sins. He spoke of regions where the cold was so intense that it froze not only the body but also thoughts and emotions. Other areas were dominated by a scorching heat that didn't burn the flesh, but the very essence of consciousness. "What disturbed me most," confessed the elderly priest, "wasn't the intensity of the physical suffering, but the absolute hopelessness that permeated every inch of that place. It was as if the very possibility of redemption, of repentance, of change, had been permanently extinguished. The souls there suffered not only because of their past actions, but because they had forever lost the capacity to love, to connect with the divine, to experience any form of peace or joy." During these transcendental experiences, Father Morti reported encountering souls he recognized from his earthly life. These weren't necessarily people he had known personally, but historical figures whose stories he had studied during his theological training. He described seeing Roman emperors who had persecuted Christians, political leaders who had caused mass suffering, and even some clergymen who had betrayed their sacred vows. The most shocking thing he revealed was realizing that many of these souls weren't there for crimes obvious to human eyes, but for sins of the heart, pride, hatred, despair, the definitive refusal to accept divine forgiveness. Father Morty's account of his infernal experiences didn't just limit itself to describing suffering. He also spoke of the demonic hierarchy that governed those shadowy regions. According to his testimony, there were entities of immense power that orchestrated the torments according to a perverse and cruel logic. These creatures, whom he identified as high-ranking fallen angels, possessed intelligence superior to human understanding and profound knowledge of the nature of the human soul, using this knowledge to maximize the suffering of their victims. For those who follow extraordinary accounts like this, it's worth staying tuned to these revelations that challenge our conventional understanding of reality, as stories like Father Morty's continue to emerge from secret archives around the world, offering unique insights into the deepest mysteries of human existence. What perhaps was most unsettling in Father Morty's testimony was his description of the spiritual geography of hell. He spoke of vast plains where souls wandered eternally without purpose, haunted by their own regrets that could never be transformed into redemption. There were also deep abysses where the silence was so absolute that it became a form of torture, and mountains of black ice where souls remained frozen in their worst moments of hatred and despair. Time there doesn't exist as we know it, explained Father Morty. Each moment feels like an eternity, but simultaneously, consciousness maintains a sharp perception that this condition will never end. It's like being trapped in a nightmare of which one is fully aware, but from which one can never awaken. He described how some souls desperately tried to communicate with him during these visions, begging for prayers, for intercession, for any form of relief, but their voices were muffled by an invisible force that prevented any form of solace or hope. One of the most striking experiences reported by Father Morty occurred during a particularly difficult exorcism in 2010. The victim was a young woman of 25 who had been involved in occult practices since adolescence. During the ritual, Father Morty was suddenly transported to a region of hell he had never visited before. It was a place that seemed to be a distorted reflection of a modern city, with skyscrapers that extended both upwards and downwards, forming an infinite labyrinth of corridors and empty rooms. In this infernal city, he witnessed something that forever changed his understanding of the nature of evil. He saw millions of souls who had died in utter despair, not necessarily for having committed heinous crimes, but for having completely lost faith in the possibility of redemption. They were people who in life had convinced themselves that they were irredeemably wicked, that they did not deserve forgiveness, that there was no hope for them. Hell, Father Morty realized at that moment, is not just a place of punishment, it is also the destination of those who refuse to accept God's unconditional love. This revelation brought a completely new dimension to his theological understanding. He began to realize that many of the souls in hell were not there because God had condemned them, but because they themselves had chosen to condemn themselves. Pride, self-condemnation, the refusal to accept divine forgiveness became, paradoxically, the shackles that bound these consciences in a state of eternal suffering. God doesn't send anyone to hell, whispered Father Morty, his voice heavy with profound sadness. Souls send themselves there through their own choices, through their refusal to accept the infinite love that has always been available to them. Hell is ultimately the voluntary absence of God, the result of a free choice that becomes irreversible after death. During his final years, Father Morty began to have visions not only of hell, but also of purgatory and heaven. These more luminous experiences served as a necessary counterpoint to the darkness he had witnessed. Purgatory, according to his account, was a place of intense hope, where souls underwent purification processes that, while painful, were imbued with a deep sense of purpose and progress. There, the suffering wasn't empty like in hell, he explained. Each pain had meaning, each tear was an opportunity for spiritual growth. His visions of heaven were indescribable in human words. He spoke of a light that did not hurt the eyes, but which, on the contrary, nourished the soul in a way that transcended any earthly experience. Heaven isn't a place, he tried to explain, it's a state of being, a way of existence where the soul finally finds its true nature, its ultimate purpose, its perfect connection with the divine. He described having seen deceased relatives, saints he had venerated during his life, and a luminous presence that he identified as Christ himself. What most impressed Father Morty in these heavenly visions was the complete absence of judgment or condemnation. In heaven, he said, there is no concept of merit or demerit as we understand it on earth. There is only pure love, total acceptance, and infinite understanding that embraces each soul without reservation. This perception led him to question many of the traditional doctrines about salvation and damnation that he had preached for decades. In his last months, Father Morty began to experience regular visits from angelic entities who came to prepare him for his own transition. He described these beings as presences of pure light that communicated not through words, but through direct transmissions of knowledge and love. They showed me that everything I had experienced during my life, all the spiritual battles, all the exorcisms, were part of a larger plan that I couldn't comprehend while limited by an earthly perspective. These angelic visits brought profound revelations about the nature of death and what happens immediately after the last breath. According to Father Morty, death is not a single event, but a gradual process of releasing consciousness from physical limitations. The soul doesn't simply go somewhere after death, he explained. It becomes what it always was, but which was obscured by the bodily experience. If the soul cultivated love, compassion, and faith during earthly life, it naturally rises to more luminous states of existence. If it fed on hatred, despair, and separation, it is drawn to corresponding regions of darkness. One of Father Gabriel Morty's most shocking revelations concerned the signs preceding a person's death. He claimed that in the weeks or months before passing, the soul begins to gradually disconnect from the body, allowing for expanded perceptions of spiritual reality. Therefore, he explained, people nearing death frequently report visits from deceased relatives, visions of light, or mystical experiences. These aren't hallucinations caused by medication or brain deterioration. They are genuine perceptions of dimensions of reality that normally remain hidden from embodied consciousness. Father Morty also spoke about what he called a life review, a process that apparently occurred at the moment of death, where the soul instantaneously experienced all the consequences of its earthly actions, not only in relation to itself, but also to all other people affected by its choices. It's a moment of absolute clarity, he described, where pretexts, justifications, and self-deception simply vanish. The soul sees its life with perfect objectivity, finally understanding the true impact of every thought, word, and action. This life review wasn't described by Father Morty as an external judgment imposed by a punitive deity, but as a natural process of self-assessment where the soul itself, finally freed from the limitations of physical perception, could clearly see the difference between its actions that generated love and unity versus those that created separation and suffering. The soul becomes its own judge, he whispered, and that is simultaneously the greatest mercy and the greatest justice possible. During the last days of his life, Father Morty experienced what he described as a gradual opening of the veil between the physical world and the spiritual dimensions. He reported constantly seeing luminous presences in his room, some of which he identified as saints and angels, others as the souls of people he had helped during his years of exorcisms. They came to thank me, he explained with tears in his eyes, not only for the liberation from their demonic possession, but for having witnessed through me that there were forces greater than evil, that divine love was more powerful than any darkness. One of the most profound experiences of Father Morty's final days was a mystical encounter with the one he identified as the Virgin Mary. This apparition didn't occur in a dreamlike or semi-delirious state, but in full consciousness, in the presence of other religious figures who later confirmed perceptible changes in the room's atmosphere. According to his account, the Mother of Christ appeared enveloped in a soft golden light, radiating such intense compassion that he felt instantly healed of all the spiritual trauma accumulated during decades of battling demonic forces. She showed me, Father Morty recounted, that every exorcism I had performed, every soul I had helped liberate, had been a victory not only against evil but a demonstration of the transformative power of unconditional love. She made me understand that my mission on earth had not been merely to cast out demons, but to reveal through these extreme experiences that no soul is beyond redemption, that no darkness is stronger than the divine light. This Marian vision also brought revelations about the interconnected nature of all existence. Father Morty described perceiving how every soul he had helped was connected to an infinite network of other consciousnesses, and how their spiritual liberation had created waves of healing that spread far beyond what he could imagine. The good we do on earth, he now perceived, is not limited to the present moment or the people directly involved. It reverberates through dimensions of existence that our earthly minds cannot even conceive. In his final moments, Father Morty experienced what he described as a joyful dissolution of the boundary between his individual consciousness and a greater universal consciousness. He didn't feel he was losing his identity, but that he was finally discovering his true identity as an integral part of an infinitely loving whole. "I am not dying" were some of his last recorded words. "I am being born into my true life." Father Morty's death experience, as reported by those present, was marked by extraordinary peace. His last breaths were accompanied by a serene smile, as if he were seeing something of indescribable beauty. Several of those present reported feeling a loving and powerful presence in the room, a sense that something sacred was happening there. But Father Morty's revelations about the afterlife didn't end with his physical death. In the months following his death, several religious and lay people who had been close to him began to report mystical experiences, where they felt his presence or received messages they attributed to the deceased priest. These experiences weren't hallucinations or psychological projections of grief, but consistent and verifiable phenomena suggesting a continuity of consciousness beyond physical death. One of the most significant messages was received by a young seminarian who had worked as Father Morty's assistant during his final years. During a deep prayer, the young man reported experiencing a clear vision where the priest appeared in a state of radiant luminosity, communicating not through words, but through direct transmissions of knowledge and love. The essence of the message was that physical death was really just a transition to broader forms of existence and spiritual service. He showed me, the seminarian recounted, that his work as an exorcist had been only a preparation for a much larger mission in the spiritual dimensions. Now freed from the limitations of the physical body, he could help souls in multiple dimensions simultaneously, serving as a bridge between the earthly world and the celestial realms. This vision suggested that those who dedicated their lives to spiritual service don't simply rest after death, but assume even greater responsibilities in the cosmic economy of good and evil. Father Gabriele Morty's posthumous revelations included insights into the state of the souls he'd exorcised during his lifetime. According to these mystical communications, many of these individuals weren't just freed from demonic possession, but experienced profound spiritual transformations that continued in their afterlife journeys. Some even became spiritual guardians for other souls undergoing healing and liberation. What emerges from Father Gabriele Morty's complete testimony is a radically expanded understanding of existence, where physical life is just one chapter of a much larger story. His experiences suggest that hell, purgatory, and heaven aren't fixed destinations imposed by external divine judgment, but states of consciousness corresponding to fundamental choices each soul makes regarding love, forgiveness, and connection with the divine. The most compelling evidence that hell is real, according to Father Morty's testimony, isn't in terrifying descriptions of physical torment, but in the revelation that some consciences can voluntarily choose eternal separation from divine love. Hell exists not because God desires punishment, but because free will includes the freedom to definitively reject the offered salvation. Simultaneously, his experiences reveal that heaven is equally real, not as a place of rewards for the good, but as the natural state of consciousness that chooses love, forgiveness, and union with the divine. Purgatory emerges in his testimony, not as temporary punishment, but as a loving process of healing and growth for souls who desire divine union but still carry spiritual wounds that need transforming. Perhaps the deepest revelation in Father Morty's testimony is the understanding that each soul possesses a unique and sacred destiny in the cosmic economy of existence. No one is disposable, no life is insignificant, no choice lacks eternal consequences. Every person who passes through this earth participates in a grand symphony of consciousness, where every note, whether harmonious or dissonant, contributes to a larger composition that transcends our limited understanding. Father Morty's final recorded words were a passionate plea for people to understand the preciousness of their earthly journey. Don't waste this sacred opportunity to love, to forgive, to serve, to grow spiritually. Physical life is brief, but its consequences echo through eternity. Choose love in every moment. Choose forgiveness even when it seems impossible. Choose faith even in the deepest darkness. For these choices determine not only our individual destiny, but contribute to the healing and evolution of all universal consciousness. The manuscript concludes with a prayer Father Morty wrote days before his death, a supplication summarizing his understanding of human existence. God the Father, who created us for eternal love, help us understand that we are all pilgrims on a sacred journey toward union with you. May we always choose light over darkness, forgiveness over resentment, hope over despair. And when our earthly journey ends, may we find ourselves not as strangers before your throne, but as beloved children finally returning home, a home we never truly left. Amen. This extraordinary testimony of Father Gabriele Morty remains one of the most important spiritual documents of our time, a unique window into mysteries that transcend our ordinary understanding of reality. His words challenge our conventional conceptions of life and death, good and evil, salvation and damnation, offering a profoundly hopeful perspective on the ultimate destiny of the human soul. May his courage in sharing these revelations continue to inspire those seeking to understand the deepest mysteries of existence, reminding us always that we are far more than our physical bodies, far more than our earthly circumstances, far more than our temporal limitations. We are eternal souls on a journey of love, growth, and divine union that continues far beyond our passage through this physical world.